Now, the sectional chart gives you a lot of useful information, and sometimes it can give you life-saving information. Because if you're doing any low flying at all, you'd like to know about things like this. These are TV antennas called obstructions, obstacles, and called day runners if you're not careful. Well, you'd like to know about these in advance if you're flying low, and you can do that by looking on your sectional chart. So let's take a look at Figure 25, Area 1. And when you get to Figure 25, Area 1, let's find an airport called Air Park East in the lower left-hand corner. If you look just a little bit down and to the right, you see an upside-down V with a dot. And that is a symbol for an obstruction, or the FAA calls it an obstacle. It's something you don't want to hit. It's a tall antenna, tall building, maybe a grain elevator, something of that sort. And you'll see a couple numbers over here on the right-hand side. The big number that is bold tells you the MSL elevation of that obstruction. It tells you how high the top of the obstruction is above sea level, and they call that the elevation of the obstruction. So if they ask you on a test, what is the elevation of this obstruction, you read the bold number, and that tells you how high the top of the obstruction is above sea level. If, on the other hand, they ask you the height of the obstruction, you would look at the little number in parentheses, and that tells you the height of the top of the obstruction above ground level. Now, here's what these numbers tell you. Let's assume you're flying along, and you happen to hit the top of the obstruction. Well, the bold number tells you what your altimeter will read when you hit that obstruction, and the little number in parentheses tells you how far you'll fall to the ground. Okay, so this is the elevation, and this is the height of the obstruction. You've got to be careful which one they asked you about. Now let's take a look at Air Park East Airport. And as tricky and as sneaky as they could possibly be, they ask you a question about this obstruction right here, nearly hidden by the airport symbol. And they ask you, in this particular case, is how high would you have to fly over the top of this obstruction by 500 feet? Well, we know that they give you this number, the bold number. By the way, they notice they didn't give you the AGL height of the obstruction. They just gave you the MSL elevation of the obstruction. We know that that number tells us what the altimeter is going to read when we hit that obstruction right at the top. We don't want to hit that obstruction. We want to be 500 feet higher. So you take this number and add 500 feet. And to fly 500 feet over the top of this obstruction, you'd have to fly at 1,273 feet MSL. And I can't believe it. That's a real good, real-life question. The FAA actually asked you one of those on the test. Now let's mosey on over to Figure 24, and we'll take a look at some other things that you really need to know about obstructions. First of all, sometimes you see two obstructions that look like they're welded together, and that's referred to as a group obstruction. When the obstructions on the ground are so close together that they're really just a unit, they will be shown as a group obstruction. Now here is an Eiffel Tower type symbol, or at least that's what I like to call it, and that is used when the obstruction is at least 1,000 feet above ground level. So whenever you see an Eiffel Tower type symbol, that tells you that that sucker is tall, at least 1,000 feet above ground level. Now let's move over to the right of the airport. When we get over there, what you're going to find is a group obstruction with a starburst symbol at the top of it, and that starburst symbol tells you this obstruction has high intensity lights. Now let me show you a question that they're going to ask you on the FAA knowledge exam that I think is very difficult. What makes it difficult is finding the right obstruction. They're going to say, first of all, this obstruction is on the 340 radial 11 miles from the Savannah Vortex. Well, then you need to find the Savannah Vortex. So here's the compass rose for the Savannah Vortex. Right in the center of it, very hard to see because it's underneath an airspace circle, is the Savannah Vortex. So you want to go out the 340 radial and 11 miles. So we'll find 11 miles and get it right beside that vortex, and then go up the 340 radial, and son of a gun, there is a group obstruction, and they're asking you about that group obstruction. Well, the question about that group obstruction is, how high is that obstruction? Well, all we have is this number right here, 455. Now let me ask you a question. Is that the height or the elevation? And the answer is that's the elevation, because this number is 455 MSL, and that's the elevation of the obstruction. Now the trick to this question is finding the proper obstruction, because there are obstructions all over the place, so make sure that you use your plotter to find the proper obstruction. This is so much fun. Let's take a look at Figure 21, Area 2. And you get to Figure 21, Area 2. Let's take a look at Lake Drummond. And they're going to say, take a look at Lake Drummond. What is that flag symbol at Lake Drummond? Let me ask you a question. True or false? That is a golf course. No, that's not a golf course. You can't put a golf course in a lake. That is what they call a visual checkpoint. It's a visual reporting point, and it's not mandatory or compulsory. It's voluntary to use, but up here to the right, you see that there's Norfolk, and you call Norfolk Approach Control. Well, they want you to know that here at Lake Drummond, that flag is a visual checkpoint that you would use to identify your position for an issue called a Norfolk Approach Control here. And the reason that they have that there, they put that flag there, and because that they have that visual checkpoint flag, it means it's fair game for you to call up the controller and say, Norfolk Approach, this is Cherokee 7599 Romeo, Lake Drummond. And because they have that flag, this controller is supposed to know where Lake Drummond is. On the other hand, because they have that flag at Lake Drummond, it means it's fair game for the controller to call you up and say, Cherokee 7599 Romeo, report Lake Drummond. And because there's a red flag there at Lake Drummond, you're supposed to know where Lake Drummond is. But it's not compulsory to make that report. It just helps everybody out. It's voluntary. Now let's take a look at Area 5 on Figure 21, and I want to show you something that I think will get your attention. Because when you look right here, you notice a box where it says Caution, Unmarked Balloon on Cable to 3,000 feet MSL. These are called heliostats, and let's take a look at what we're talking about. Here, we're flying an airplane at 35,000 feet, but at 18,000 feet, there's a balloon. Now, the balloon isn't the hazard so much because you can see it, but going all the way to the ground, in this case, 18,000 feet, there is a cable, and you can't see that. So the FAA marks these on the chart because they thought you'd want to know. Now, the hazard is this balloon and the cable underneath it. By the way, it's not the blimp hangers. That's not what they're referring to. They're referring to this balloon and particularly the cable going all the way down to the ground. So, the FAA marks these things because you can't see the cable, and the FAA is equivalently saying to you, look out, boys, there's the cable there. Now let's take a look, if you will, at another question the FAA is going to ask you about, and that is on Figure 22. So let's take a look at Figure 22, and when we get there, let's you and I go down the lower right-hand corner of Figure 22, and down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's a note that tells you that the contour interval is 500 feet. And then they're going to ask you to go up and take a look at the light tan area between Minot, which is up here, and Audubon Lake, which is down here, and this whole light tan area is up in here. They're going to say, take a look at that light tan area, and what is the elevation of that light tan area? They're asking you, what do these contour lines tell you? Well, here's a contour line like so, and we know that they come at 500-foot intervals. And on the green side of the contour line, we can look at this airport at Garrison, and the elevation of that airport is 1932, and we can look up here and we see another airport up here, good old Polshuk, for instance, is 2245 in the tan area. So that contour line, as you can see, is the 2,000-foot contour line. It says so right there. The green area is less than 2,000 feet. The tan area is above 2,000 feet. Since the contour intervals are 500 feet, this tan area is between 2,000 feet and 2,500 feet MSL. And believe it or not, you and I have figured out everything the FAA is going to ask you about sectional charts on the test. So it's time to fold that chart up, put it away, and let you and I go flying.